Welcome to the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This podcast is dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like all the best bookshops, this podcast is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. So tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book at the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. I'm Stacey Horan, author, book lover, and host of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This is episode number 237. For more information about this or any of our episodes, go to my website, staceyhoran.com. If you enjoy the podcast, leave us a review, like us on social media, and share us with your friends, family, and fellow readers. In today's episode of The Bookshop at the End of the Internet, I'm chatting with author Lola Reid Allin about her new memoir, Highway to the Sky, An Aviator's Journey. Lola wanted to write a book that was not just about aviation, but also about her experience as a female pilot at a time when it was extremely rare for women to be commercial pilots. When she embarked on this career, Lola didn't expect her male colleagues or even society at large to be supportive of her career choice. While the industry has changed since Lola started out as a pilot, women still make up a very small percentage of the world's commercial pilots, and many of the problems she faced in her career are still ongoing. Highway to the Sky details the trials and tribulations of Lola's career in aviation, but it also addresses issues of motherhood, divorce, and non-traditional careers. Lola's purpose in writing this memoir was to say to other women, "You are not alone." In this episode, I'll chat with Lola about her writing journey, the hardest part about writing this memoir for her, and what her family thought of her quitting her day job to become a full-time commercial pilot, as well as a few other things coming up. Lola Reid Allin, thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast.
Well, hi, Stacey. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
I thought what we could do today is talk about your new book, Highway to the Sky, An Aviator's Journey. If you don't mind, tell us a little bit about this book and what inspired you to write it.
The story is obviously it's about aviation. It's got a picture of me on the front cover beside an airplane. So the underlying theme, or what drives the story forward, is aviation. But the real theme, the real purpose of the story is to talk about my experience as a female pilot when it was an extremely rare event for a female to be a commercial pilot. There have been female pilots flying since 1910, but commercial female pilots were relatively rare. And the first one was in Germany, and then 1934 in America, and she lasted less than a year, drummed out by the men. Then 1973 in America, the military started hiring, and then 3 women were hired in North America with the airlines, 1 in Canada, 2 in America. And I started in 1979, and things hadn't changed too much, and things have improved in a sense. Our percentages are still pretty low. About 4.7% of the world's female commercial pilots are female. So that's pretty low, but we have a lot more females flying. So that is to say, many more females are flying today commercially than when I was flying starting in 1979, but the percentage hasn't changed. In fact, it's gone down slightly. And I was under the impression that yes, there are a lot more females flying, but I was under the impression that the percentages had increased. And then I realized that that was not true. I started reaching out to aviation groups, the 99's International Organization of Women Pilots, Women in Aviation International, and realized that some of the problems I experienced were still ongoing. And now that we have power in numbers, and so you can reach out and talk to your sister commercial pilots, which is something I didn't really have the luxury of doing very often. I never flew with another female pilot. I rarely saw another female pilot. I'm in Canada. I did meet one female instructor before I got my private license. And during my career, I met four others, but they weren't at my base, so I hardly ever saw them. Once I remember going to Winnipeg to hang out with one of them for the weekend, but it was really kind of lonely. And I also wanted to talk about several issues that relate to women, that is motherhood, divorce, single parenthood, and having a non-traditional career. And I also was married to, yes, he was abusive, but he was, and I have to call abuse abuse. That's what it was. But it wasn't like he came home every night and beat me up. He just was a very bad-tempered alcoholic, who was more of a bully. But I was tired of that. So I've got a lot of talking points, and I wrote the book so that I could continue the conversations that some people have started, but to really build on that and to reach out to other women and say, hey, you're not alone in a book form. I mean, there are public forums on Facebook where women who are professional pilots will reach out to each other and say, hey, you wouldn't believe what happened to me. I had a great day, or I didn't have such a great day. Some guy said, I'd really like to have a drink. Can you serve me a drink? Or where's the pilot? Even though you're wearing a pilot uniform. So that kind of stuff is why I wrote the book, to continue conversations. I won't say start, because some of these conversations are obviously ongoing, but to let people know. And I've had lots of great response from people, who men and women, because we need not to just talk to women about the issues, because I think most women will understand a lot of these issues, but we need to change the social fabric that says, or it seems to still think, that men are more qualified for certain professions than, and women are more qualified or more suited to other professions. And while some individuals within the male female population are more suited to certain professions, the plane has no idea what gender you are.
That's a very good point. I'm curious, why write this book now? Was there something that happened that led you to think, okay, now's the time?
Yeah, there was. So it was 2014, and my husband drew to my attention that there was this note written to a female commercial pilot, a captain on WestJet, and it was written on a little, the little airplane serviettes that you get with your snacks.
Mhm.
And I'm paraphrasing, but it was along the lines of, Dear Captain WestJet, an airliner is no place for a woman. Women, we are short mothers and wives. The next time WestJet has a fair lady at the helm, please let me know so I can take a different flight. And I thought, what? What? How is this even possible? If I'd gotten a note like that, I was like, yeah, right, sure. Just another day at the office, somebody upset about something or other. I'm taking a job from a man, I'm doing a man's job. I can't do the baggage, whatever, because I'm not strong enough, that kind of stuff. But this was 2014, and I by then wasn't flying commercially. What I was doing is actually going to Mexico, Belize, and Guatemala. I'd lived in Mexico for 3 years, and I had started a long-term ethnographic study of the Maya of Mesoamerica. So I have two target groups, the Mopan in southwestern Belize and the Lacandon in the Chiapas highlands of Mexico. But there were no real nonstop flights from Toronto to Guatemala City or Belize City. There is a direct flight or nonstop flight from Toronto to Cancun, but I didn't always want to go to Cancun. There were other areas in the Yucatan I wanted to go to. So I had to do the American hub system to go to Miami. Atlanta, which was the best really, or Houston. And I'd always see lots of female pilots. So that's why I was saying, I thought, oh, wow, look, our numbers are up. This is really great. And I was absolutely gobsmacked when I saw this note. It was absolutely amazing. So what was different in this particular captain of WestJet. What her experience was is that she had the support of her company, which is great. She had the support of human resources, which we didn't have even when I was flying. It was just really the start of the human resources in Canada, America, Australia. So there was no one to really appeal to then. But in addition to the support of the human resources as well as the company itself, she had Facebook. And so she posted this note on Facebook, which is exactly where I saw it. And that didn't happen, right? So when I was flying, yes, you could write a letter to the 99s or whatever, or you could make a long distance phone call, which until maybe what 20 years ago was almost cost prohibitive. So there wasn't a lot of recourse. And yes, I guess I could have had it published in a newspaper, had that note been written to me, but it was a different world. And I was so excited, and it absolutely galvanized me to start doing research. And then I started writing, and I'd written a few things before, not a full length book, but I'd had several articles published in niche publications as well as newspapers, but primarily about the Maya and about travel, because right, travel destinations and how to travel and why getting lost isn't such a bad thing. Not hopelessly lost, but somewhat lost. Temporarily disoriented is not such a bad thing. You'll find, you may find something of much greater interest than what you were really trying to find. But I very quickly learned that writing a few articles of what, 5,000 words or something was very different than writing a book. So I started taking courses at Gotham Writers, New York City, and I took a variety of courses. They had memoir, mystery, travel writing, how to get published. And then because I'm Canadian, I thought it would be a little bit easier. Those were all done via Zoom, which I love. But then went to the University of Toronto in the creative writing program. And all of these experiences were amazing. And I took a short program at Wesleyan University as well, again via Zoom. And they were all very, very helpful. Just the feedback from the other student writers, the feedback from the teachers, and I think everybody contributed in some way to this. And I know at first I was way too technical. And somebody said, like, we don't want to learn how to fly. We want to hear more about you, which was the hardest thing to talk about, my feelings and how the experience impacted me. And then translate that into something that someone else is going to want to read, not about me, but about, hey, I've had that experience too. I understand, what it's like being a single mom or a single dad, or I understand what it's like being in a power and control relationship. Yeah, there was everyone contributed a little bit, so I'm grateful to everyone who ever read any chapters of my book.
Well, let's go back to the story itself because I'm curious. Can you tell us a little bit about how you started flying? Like how did
Oh,
you, because you mentioned you had a non-traditional career for that time, and it's probably even today considered a non-traditional
it
career.
is. It is
But how did
absolutely.
you get started in it?
Well, that bullying husband I mentioned, we knew our marriage was crumbling, and he knew I was unhappy. And he, by the way, was a bully because he was emulating his father. Had I known that, I mean, whenever I met his father, he was lovely until we got married, and a couple of years fast forward, and he was to be a bit of a bully to his wife, not to me, but that was the process. So my husband didn't quite understand that that wasn't the right way to treat a wife. He just knew that I wasn't happy, and he said one day, he said, we should take up flying lessons. Oh, and by the way, I've already booked us introductory flights. It was pretty cool. And one reason I like doing these podcasts or public presentations about women in aviation history is that it's very important to have role models. So there aren't a lot of role models who are female pilots or female engineers or female rocket scientists or female aerospace engineers. But my husband, had two role models. His father was a pilot, not professionally, and his father's brother, so his uncle, they were both pilots. And between the two of them, they had three light aircraft. And his dad was really an exciting guy. He would fly up in northern Canada and hang out with the Inuit. really amazing. But so Paul, my ex-husband, had that role model. And so we started flying, and it was great, actually. We would go to the airport together, and he would fly, and I would stay back and look after our son, or vice versa. Then I would fly, and he would stay back and look after the son. You know, Reed, there was a sandbox at the airport, so that worked out really well. But yeah, I just started, and I never once when he came home and said, "Hey, let's go flying." I didn't think, yes, oh yes, I think I'll just quit my job next year and become a commercial pilot. It was like, gee, okay, I've always wanted to fly, but that might be, when I wanted to fly, I was first of all a little girl and then a teenager, and now I'm 24. By the way, the same age as Amelia Earhart when she started flying. But I thought, maybe I can't do it. Maybe it's not for me. The first introductory lesson was about 20 minutes, and I did not take control of the aircraft. The instructor offered, and I thought, no, I need a more of a lesson than that. But after about, again, I don't even really remember, but maybe 5 hours, 10 hours, 15 hours, it was before I went solo that I knew I really loved this. And then after I went solo, it just, I just was on a roll. It was like, wow, I love this. I got my commercial license, my instructor rating, my multi-engine instrument rating. I just loved it.
Well, let's talk about some of those key points, the key stopping points on your career there, because I'm curious if you can maybe highlight for us some of those key milestones for you, and in particular, what sort of challenges you faced, being that, like you said, there weren't a lot of women doing that at the time. So I imagine it was not an easy thing to achieve each of those milestones.
Certainly for the private and the commercial, it was just a matter of hard work, of practice, and reading some technical manuals like relating to the aircraft itself, but also learning about meteorology, learning about air regulations, air navigation orders, the aircraft itself, aero engines, learning about theory of flight. So there was a lot to learn, but it was just a matter of, discipline and study. And because flight schools, it's a fairly low profit margin business, unless there's some really obvious and very dramatic reason why a student shouldn't be flying, they're going to encourage you. So I didn't have any issues that way at all. I had a couple instructors, one in particular, who was very keen to take me home to bed, but so very inappropriate, to say the least, considering I was married and he knew it, and he was married. So very inappropriate. And then when I did get hired, I had um, then there were some issues. I had no trouble getting hired, but I frequently was propositioned by a supervisor or one of the other pilots. And I mean, they would once they didn't get anywhere, they stopped, but they were fairly serious in their pursuit for, I don't know, several flights, let's say, because if you're on an overnighter, you're kind of right there. I mean, not literally in the same bedroom, but you're not too far away. So I found that very stressful, actually, because as you know, it's lots of articles about this too, that it's stressful enough trying to perform on your job, but then worrying about whether you're going to get fired or not promoted, or your next evaluation won't be very good because you didn't sleep with the boss. That kind of stuff is really stressful. Or just thinking about flying with someone who you know that when you get to the overnight destination might um, I never thought I was going to have anything really horrible happen, but just, trying to say no in the most polite way, right? Because it's a very difficult situation that I don't think one of them in one case was just a really nice guy who wanted to go to bed with me, but the other one was very what's the word? Um, very angry when I wouldn't, and wouldn't promote me until, well, he said if I slept with him, he would then consider promoting me because women typically weren't charter pilots. They were okay to be instructors, but they certainly weren't suitable or qualified to be charter pilots. And if I slept with him, then certainly he might consider promoting me. So that was kind of the issues that I dealt with.
So, looking back, are there lessons that you learned that you would have liked to have been able to tell your younger self? Are there things that you would have liked to have said, okay, you're going to experience this. This is what you should know. Here's the best way to deal with it.
Yeah. I guess I would have been less friendly and outgoing, which seems ridiculous
Mm.
to have to change my personality, which is friendly and outgoing, which is what the first fellow said when I was doing my private flight training, the one who was married and knew I was married. He said, well, you're really friendly. It was like, yes, I am friendly, but you are my instructor. I thought that was appropriate to be friendly. I do have now a female friend of mine who is flying commercially for a major air carrier, and she's very cautious about when she's overnight on a scheduled service flight, and they're at a hotel. She's very careful not to go out to supper with the male captain, any of the male captains. She will go out to dinner by herself, or she'll have dinner ordered into her room. She has no um, she does not deliberately does not socialize, doesn't go out to bars. Obviously, if she's not going to go out to dinner, she's certainly not going to go out drinking. She does, she's very, very concerned to keep her reputation pretty pristine. And I suppose I should have been a lot more careful about that. I just, again, I'm very optimistic and very trusting, and generally people haven't let me down. But I don't think that the onus should be on me. It's a lot like saying, "Oh, I should wear a burqa because I'm attractive," right? And therefore, it's not me that's the issue. It's the other person, the man, who's saying, oh, I can't possibly control myself, so you have to, it's your responsibility or your fault that I'm acting this way. So I think I should have had a little bit more insight into that. But what I would have done much differently, maybe been, as they say, maybe a little less, you know friendly.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is unfortunate to have to
Isn't it?
say that. Yeah. Yeah. Very. Well, I'm curious what responses have been from your readers and people you have talked to about this, because you said both men and women have responded to the
Mm.
story. So, has any of their responses surprised you?
Got an email from an old boyfriend who said, I loved your book, it's great. I'm happily married, and by the way, my wife and I went to this air show last year, and she loves skydiving so much she's now taken up skydiving. I thought, well, that's pretty cool. And yesterday I got an email from a man in Finland who said he'd heard me on a podcast. It was called Airplane Geeks. He'd heard me on a podcast. He loved the story. He ordered the book in Finland, I guess Amazon.com.fin maybe. I'm not sure. And he said he loved it. He read it almost in 2 days overnight, and at one particular point he's reading it on the metro in Finland, and he was so excited he threw his hands up, he said, and exclaimed. He said he wondered, I'm sure what the other people on the subway or the bus were thinking. um it's been very positive, really. It's written, I suppose, it's written from a woman's perspective, but it's not a woman's book. It's just more of a history, a snapshot of what it was like, what my expectations were as a woman, what my parents' expectations were for me as a woman, which were slightly more than diapers and dishes. They expected me I would get a job. My grandfather hoped that I would get a university education, which I did. But then, once I got that university education, when I told my parents and my grandparents that I was quitting my job, at three different times, my mother, my father, and my grandfather, three different times said, "What? You're quitting your perfectly good job?" And I thought, have they like choreographed this? Is that possible? And then my grandfather said, "Oh, you can't do that." And it was, I was thinking, since he wasn't a pilot, but he had flown with the Barnstormers in the 1920s, that he was concerned about my physical safety in an aircraft that when he was, thinking about the barnstorming planes. And but no, that wasn't it. He said, "You'll be taking jobs from men."
Mm.
So that I think is important. He apologized immediately, by the way. But I think that's important because when even my own relatives thought this was a very radical thing to do, to quit a job in the bank as a supervisor, working in a computer department, to go fly airplanes when no one they knew flew airplanes, and certainly no women that they'd ever seen had flown an airplane. It was pretty radical. But if that's the way they think, and they are my family, and they're supposed to be supportive, that's the historical perspective. So why would I expect some of the guys that I worked with to say, "Oh, great, we've got a female pilot"? I mean, why would I expect them to say that when my own family didn't? And yet I just did my job.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about writing this book because I'm curious how the experience was for you because it seems like you have taken on a number of different challenges in life, right? Becoming a commercial pilot is but one of them, it sounds like. So I'm curious how you approached this particular challenge of writing a memoir because writing a memoir is not for the faint of heart. From all the people I've talked to, all the authors I've talked to who have written it, it is cathartic in some ways. It is grueling in others. So I'm curious how you tackled this particular challenge.
Well, the hardest thing was being emotionally honest. Now, I'm not saying that I ever thought of being dishonest, but I just sort of left it out. So, for example, if you're familiar with Beryl Markham's book, West with the Night, she she's one of my heroines, and she was the first person, male or female, to fly an airplane from England to North America. But she also had a very different life. She grew up with the Maasai in Kenya, in British East Africa. Like, it was quite a character. Her book, even though she was married 3 times and had numerous lovers, has no personal information in it whatsoever. And it's like, wait a minute, how is that even possible? It doesn't even mention that she gets married.
Let
Forget all
alone
the
three
lovers.
times.
Yeah, yeah, doesn't mention it at all. Although, I mean, was she married? Yeah, and at the time of writing, she was on her third husband. So, but there's no personal information. Now, my book was not quite that austere, but it talked about my husband because that's really germane to how I got flying. So it talked about him, it talked about the abuse, um, the more verbal abuse, it talked about our son. But then when I had a developmental editor who said, "Well, your book is almost the way it was at that time before it was published, was almost like two books. You've got the marriage, the dissolution of the marriage, so very personal stuff, and then you go flying." So so I added a few boyfriends. Um, and that actually got fun. I mean, it actually made it fun. For me, that was difficult, but writing this was not cathartic for me because I never blamed anybody. I think maybe some people should have acted differently, but as I said, if my own parents weren't as supportive as I think they should have been, why would I expect the rest of society to be, right? None of the guys I worked with had had wives or girlfriends who had professions. They might have jobs outside the home, and being a housewife is laudable and very busy and challenging and exhausting. Probably easier to go outside and go to work. But they did not they weren't used to professional women. They just and I still had some great supporters. I mean, I had some allies wherever I worked that were very supportive. But it only takes one or two detractors that to start spreading rumors or watching you. But I never blamed them, with that one exception of the man who refused to promote me unless I slept with him. That was pretty hard to overlook. He knew exactly what he was doing. But otherwise, the reactions, even like the people who say at some of the northern air bases where I worked, we'd be where I'd fly into, we would also have to load. In many cases, we'd have to load the freight or the bags, and we were flying into like fishing camps and stuff like this. And a lot of the times, maybe that's not true, a few times, some of the guys would actually try and take the luggage from me and say, "Oh, you can't do this, it's way too heavy." And it's like, what they're really saying is you can't do your job. Not anyway, so I would, be very, very aggressively wrestling with this bag and then toss it into the baggage compartment. But I never blamed anybody. So it wasn't cathartic. Now, interestingly enough, a woman in England who is a pilot and is also an author, it was a joint podcast that we were having with a group called Literary Aviatrix. So, as the name implies, we're all pilots, either it could be helicopter, fixed wing, and many of us have written books. So, anyone is welcome to join the podcasts, but primarily we're females. Anyway, so she's a female pilot in England, and she was saying when we were talking, she said, the first little bit, I mean, the first 4 chapters or 3 chapters is not about flying. Well, the first chapter is entirely about flying, and then the next is, a bit of backstory. And she's like, what are we getting to the flying? When are we getting to the flying? And then she said, when we got to the flying, she realized how much those chapters about the marriage and the dissolution of the marriage and the violence affected her, and it brought back her marriage, the her first tragic marriage and the abuse. And she said it was so cathartic. So I guess it's cathartic for other people. So I thought that was great. And another woman, also on that same call, actually said that she thought it was well, certainly empowering, but also she understood now that it wasn't that the reactions she is having, because she's actually quite a young pilot, maybe age 25, the reaction she's having from other pilots, male pilots, isn't or doesn't relate to her. So she thought that was really, really helpful. And there was another pilot also on that call, and she's now a retired military and commercial pilot with a major air carrier. And she said that she found it very difficult when she started with the military, that the guys didn't like her. And she too is, friendly and outgoing and actually very sweet. And she couldn't understand why these people didn't like her. And so it's important to realize that the reactions by the passengers, by the pilots, by your coworkers probably has nothing to do with you directly. It's just they see you as a woman first, which is also why I had various propositions. They saw me as a woman first, not as a pilot doing her job. But looking in the context of the whole society, I don't know, I guess studying psychology and anthropology stood me in good stead.
Right. Did you always want to be a writer? I know you took on this challenge, but was this something you always?
No,
No.
really. I remember in grade 6, I was the or the high school, the school editor of the newspaper. No, not particularly. I've always loved books, always. Like, even when I was a little girl, what I wanted for Christmas or my birthday was books. My father built a library for me. I loved books, so I've always loved to read. I always kept a diary. But no, not particularly. It was just when I started, when I was in Mexico, living in Mexico. That's when I started writing about the Maya, and then I wrote about aviation, wrote about travel. No, interesting enough, I know there's some people say, "Oh, yeah, I've been writing since I was 6." It's like, wow.
But you found
No,
it, right?
yeah,
Better late than never.
there you go.
Well, you've written this memoir, and you mentioned you had taken a number of classes leading up to
Yes,
this to learn how to do
yes,
it. Are there other books in your future, do you think?
yes,
Oh,
absolutely.
excellent. Okay.
So the last group that I worked with is called the Literary Aviatrix Book Writers Group. And it was a spinoff, obviously, of the Literary Aviatrix. And so we were all writing about aviation. But when we formed this group, I was just reviewing the first 5 chapters. And so after that, I said, well, I'm working on my next book, and I've already got a few that I already written a few almost summaries so that it would jog my memory when I went back to actually write a bigger chapter or a bigger story. And I said, but it has nothing to do with aviation. It has to do with the Maya of Mesoamerica. Are you guys interested in reading about this? And they said, let's see what it is. So I've got about 35,000 words so far, and it's about my experiences getting out of aviation, which wasn't a conscious decision. It was just a reaction to the very sudden death of my mother and the change in circumstances. And then I went to Mexico for a week-long holiday and thought, this is perfect. This is where I'm going to move. And I went there and I needed a job. So I worked as a scuba dive master and a dive shop manager. But why I went there was so I could study and live with the Maya. So I was in the Yucatan. So the first group that and I'm going to say lived amongst and worked with were Yucatecan Mayan. And these guys, they were great. They were great guys to work with. And then I traveled around into Belize and then into other parts of Guatemala, into Guatemala and other parts of Mexico, meeting other groups of Maya. But the two that I mentioned specifically are Mopan and Lacandon with because there's a little bit of intermarriage in the Mopans, there's the Kikchi Maya as well. So it's just me living with them. And in those cases, I actually lived in their homes and experienced life as they live it every day. It wasn't like I was in a little home somewhere else or in a village with in a modern town or village 20 miles away, and I went there every day for an hour. I actually lived with them, which was an amazing experience. And I did it many times, and I'm due for a visit. But it's very eye-opening when you see what it's like to live without running water, without electricity, without emergency health services, with teachers that just barely graduated from their training. And, you're out in the jungle and you're at least 20 miles away from healthcare. It's a very different way of life. And you wash every day in the river. There's no running water at all. Now things have changed a little bit. The road has improved. And when I say 20 miles away, the road, when I first went to the place in southwestern Belize, it took about an hour and 20 minutes to go 20 miles because it was hilly, mountainous, and the road was terrible. Whereas now there is a road. They do have running water, although it's a tap in the front yard, but hey, it's still better than walking 4 to 5 miles to get water, which is, if you've tried carrying water, it's really heavy. It's
Right.
incredibly heavy. The workload is tremendous, and they do have electricity now
Okay. All
in
right.
all the villages. Yeah, so there have been some improvements, and you watch the kids grow up and get married and have their own kids.
Wow. Wow. So yet another challenge.
Yeah, it was definitely a challenge.
Wow. Okay. So we'll look forward to that. So
Yeah,
it's a
I
good
think I'm going to
follow-up.
call it, for what it's worth, I think I'm going to call that Maya Loom into the land of the Maya, which Maya Loom actually means Maya land.
Very good. Okay. Excellent. Well, Lola, if people want to learn more about you, your adventures, things that you have going on, new releases when they're ready, where should people go to find you and that information?
Well, LolaReidAllin.com is where you'll find me. Or you can email me directly. You can email me through the website, but also directly at LolaReidAllin.com. The book is available from Simon and Schuster in Canada and America, and obviously in Finland and around the world, because I have readers in Australia and Germany, England, but Finland, that was pretty cool.
Right?
Let me see. Amazon, indigo.ca in Canada, and Barnes and Noble, probably anywhere. Now, I won't say that you could go into an independent bookstore or even Amazon or Barnes and Noble and expect to see it, but you could certainly order it. It's
Right.
also available as an ebook, and I haven't started yet, but I'm starting to research doing an audiobook.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, we'll look forward to that.
Well, thank
So,
you.
Lola, thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast. And I want to wish you luck with Highway to the Sky, An Aviator's Journey, and the work in progress, your follow up. So, good luck with that. We will look forward to it. Congratulations on everything you've accomplished so far, and best of luck with the rest of your writing journey.
Well, thank you so much, Stacy. I've had a great time and I appreciate your time. It's been fun.
The Bookshop at the End of the Internet is a podcast dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like any good bookshop, this podcast features a wide variety of books by the equally varied and interesting authors who felt compelled to write them. This podcast gives you a chance to meet these wonderful writers and discover your next must-read book. Listen to the authors describe their books and tell you their stories in their own words. My interviews feature books from all genres and authors from all walks of life, including those who are indie published as well as those published by small presses and large publishing houses. Looking for unique, not so easy to find books for yourself, a friend, or a book club? Tune into this podcast and find your newest favorite author or maybe a soon-to-be bestseller. This podcast, like all the best bookshops, is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. Tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book. You never know what treasures you might find in the Bookshop at the End of the Internet.